My hot teacher has been giving us some strange homework. Our latest assignment was horrifying. I think every straight guy in my school had a thing for Mrs. Miller. Everyone in my class would get perfect scores, just so they could get her approval. I thought this was normal, but I would soon find out the horrifying secret behind her assignments. She wasn't a bad teacher, but her class was pretty boring, and the only thing that made it interesting was seeing that rack every morning. Another thing I noticed was that her homework was much different from other teachers. For certain students, she'd ask them to come to her house after school so they could complete assignments together, and if they didn't, they would fail the class. These students also happened to be the best looking ones in the class, and of course they didn't complain. Who wouldn't want to spend the night at their hot teacher's house? They just didn't know the true horrifying intentions of Mrs. Miller. I remember the first day of class when my friend Sean nearly creamed his pants when she leaned down next to him, wearing a low button-down shirt to explain how to properly use an adverb. I mostly ignored this, as I was happy that my ugly, rinky-dinky, buck-toothed, beluga-shaped friend was finally getting some play. That was until the rumor spread that Mrs. Miller was sleeping with her favorites. Most of the guys were okay with these rumors, but all her students were around 15 or 16 at this point. That's really not okay. I don't care how hot people think it is. It's a bit personal for me, if I'm honest. My older sister was preyed on by one of her teachers when she was a freshman. It only came out when she got pregnant at age 14. That guy's still rotting in jail, and when he gets out, I'm gonna probably punch his face till it breaks. I knew that there was a possibility that these rumors could be fake, so I decided to ask my friend Sean, who surprisingly was one of her favorites. I guess she must be into belugas. We were playing video games, eating mozzarella sticks, and just chatting it up when I decided to bring up Mrs. Miller. So, what do you think about her? I asked, snatching another mozzarella stick off the pile. Sean's face lit up in a way that made my stomach twist. "Oh man, she's the greatest! I got to study at her house last Saturday," he said. I swallowed. "Did all you do was study?" I asked, glancing up the stairs to make sure his mom wasn't within hearing distance. Sean grinned and leaned in close. "We did it on her kitchen table," he said. Well, that confirmed it. "Dude, she's like 30. That's not cool," I said, jerking away and nearly knocking over the pile of mozzarella sticks. Sean snorted and rolled his eyes. "Come on, it's not like I didn't want it. And she's not 30, she's 28, he said as if that made it all better. "I'm telling you, it's kinda creepy that a 28-year-old woman wants to do it with a 16-year-old, I said. I shrugged and the conversation ended there. If I asked him more about Mrs. Miller, maybe he would have told me the horrifying truth of what she was really doing. God, I really should have talked with Sean about it more. That Friday, I'd forgotten my copy of To Kill a Mockingbird in Mrs. Miller's class and was heading back to get it when I saw she wasn't alone in class. Maybe hoping to get some evidence of her creeping on teenage boys, I listened in. I recognized the other person as Malcolm. Malcolm wasn't the brightest bulb in the package. He'd been held back a year and thought of himself as a badass just because he graffitied the school before. Right now, Malcolm was crying and I felt sick to my stomach. I just don't want to lose you, Tia," he said between choked sobs. "Oh, baby." Mrs. Miller brought Malcolm into a tight hug. "You won't lose me. I love you, and you love me. That's why I know you'll do your very best to keep me." Malcolm sniffled and pulled back, but there was this oddly peaceful smile on his face. "I'll do it. You know I can," he said. "That's my baby." I darted off after that, resolving on Monday that I'd go to the principal and tell him about the conversation I heard. I needed that much time to work up my nerve. I really wish I wasn't such a coward then. That night, Malcolm went into Taco Bell and put 3 bullets in Chase Stanford's chest. It was all over Facebook. My feed went from cute animal rescue stories and memes to, holy crap, someone's shooting up Taco Bell. The only person killed was Chase, and thank God no one else was injured. But it shook me to the core when it came out that the shooter was Malcolm. I thought this was extremely weird, especially after I found out that Chase was another one of Mrs. Miller's favorites. It was like everyone went effing crazy over the span of a single night. My mom ended up guarding the door with a gun while my dad watched the back door while wielding a baseball bat. I was ordered to stay in my room, and if I heard anything suspicious to immediately call 911. And it turns out that Malcolm's murder spree had only just begun, and it wasn't only him who had suddenly gained a lust for blood. An hour after Malcolm murdered Chase, someone broke into a party at Elijah's house and proceeded to beat the hell out of him before putting another bullet in his back. Unlike Chase, Elijah managed to survive after some serious surgery, although he'd never walk again. Once again, Elijah was another one of Mrs. Miller's favorites. He was the star player on the football team. This is truly when I started to realize that something about this night was horribly wrong, and it was only just getting started. Malcolm ended up getting stabbed to death that night by someone else. He was found with a dozen stab wounds in his chest, bleeding out on a street corner. He didn't even make it until the medics got there. In his jacket pocket was a confession and a dedication. He was doing this all for his girl, to prove that he was going to be her true love forever and ever. Murder everywhere. Everyone in my school made it their responsibility to keep everyone updated as soon as they could. All I could do was watch. Max Reed broke into Brad Watson's house with a knife and ended up murdering his whole family. Brad ended up throwing Max down the stairs, sending him to the hospital. Brad ended up trying to break into the hospital where Elijah was being treated and tried to get to him. He obviously got arrested. Someone broke into Jake Curtis's house, and when he found out Jake wasn't there, ended up shooting both of his parents. Jake wasn't there because he was choking Oliver Ballard to death. The list goes on and on. I slowly started to discover the pattern very quickly. Each of the murderer's victims were the favorites of Mrs. Miller. I had a breakdown and told my parents what I'd figured out. They immediately called the cops and tipped them off. Of course, the cops went to Mrs. Miller's house, but she was long gone. She'd probably not even returned home after school let out. Her car was found abandoned a few miles out of town. I ended up getting questioned about the other favorites, and I listed who else I knew was rumored to be a favorite. I'd like to think I saved a few lives by doing that. I didn't save Sean's, though. When the police caught up to him, he'd been in the process of shooting another student in the head. The mystery second shooter. I don't know how they talked him down from the gun, but he was brought in. He's going to spend a long time in prison. Serves that beluga right. The sun came up and over a dozen people were dead. 5 favorites remained, and all of them were locked up in prison. Their stories were basically all the same, though. Mrs. Miller told them that they had to. She'd managed to manipulate all of her teenage lovers into murdering each other before she skipped town. Why, we don't know. Mrs. Miller's gone with the wind. Heck, they found out that wasn't even her real name. Her real identity is a mystery. To this day, I go visit Sean in prison every week. I'm proud of him for sticking around. Last time I saw him, though, I noticed something on his left hand. A golden ring. I asked who gave it to him. He just smiled and changed the subject, but I'm worried about him. I wonder if Mrs. Miller is still lurking around, waiting for her favorite student to get out of prison.